Everything seems to happen easier in a comic book. Maybe the production of this video series would be simpler if I had the powers of comic book storytelling formats. I don't know if anyone could help me with that.
Well, you say so.
Well, thanks, Flabber. I hope there's no consequences to this. Hello, this is Soundout here, and welcome back to the month of monsters, day 15, where we're doing a special thing on wildcard weekends. This is the Tokusatsu special, because as I promised, there is a Tokusatsu video in this. We are going to be looking at some characters from the 1996 adaptation of Juko B-Fighter known as Big Bad Beetleborgs. Specifically, the best part of the show, the Hillhurst monsters. Yes, because when they were adapting Juko B-Fighter and B-Fighter Kabuto, the idea that came about for Big Bad Beetleborgs was that 3 kids would get powers from a comic book, and those kids would be the superheroes. But because of the restrictions in filming with children, they couldn't have them on screen all the time. So some genius came up with the idea of, what if they stumble across a haunted mansion that features a bunch of monsters inspired by the Universal Classic monsters, and one ghost inspired by Jay Leno's Chen. And it was perfect because you had a sitcom setting that countered the superhero antics. In fact, for me, watching Beetleborgs, the Hillhurst monsters consistently became my favorite part. Even if they had inconsistent characters, like how one episode they wanted to eat the children, and the next episode they didn't want to eat the children, and then in one episode they kidnap a baby, but that same episode they also want to raise the baby. It gets a little weird, but I kind of appreciate the zaniness of the show. And in fact, it kind of kept everything light and fun, while also doing some interesting stuff on the superhero side. But we're focused on the monsters. There were several monsters in this. So Flabber is a ghost, Mums is a mummy, Wolfie is a werewolf, Fangula is a vampire, and Frankenbeans is a Frankenstein's monster. In Beetleborgs Metallics in 1997, they were joined by Little Ghoul, who is the Grim Reaper's niece. She also looks like a Jawa. But these monsters together were honestly really fun, and the way they were released into the Beetleborgs toy line was with an elaborate cardboard playset that doesn't hold up. Like, literally doesn't hold up, it's made of cardboard. So we're not going to worry about that part of it. Let's just take a look at the Hillhurst monsters themselves and see what antics they get up to.
Oh man, I told you the Beetleborgs house was haunted. Whoa, check it out, a haunted house playset, just like the show, with all the house monsters and Flabber. Cool, collapsing stairs. Hold on to the railing, Flabber, on your way down. Hey look, a revolving bookcase.
Beetleborgs Haunted House playset comes with monsters and Flabber. New Beetleborg Metallics action figures, each sold separately. Bandai, action to satisfaction.
So Bandai released the Haunted Hillhurst House playset in fall of 1997. This was after Metallic started airing, but it is of course based on the Hillhurst house that's been throughout the Beetleborgs series. This did include all 5 of the monster figures, which means there are some downsides to the monster figures, as this playset cost about $30. If you want to see the playset features, go check out a review by Wheelchair21. He actually sold me the Hillhurst house with the monsters after doing that video. So if you want to go check out the playset side of it, go check out his video because he covered it in pretty good detail. But let's look at the figures themselves. First up, we have Flabber. Flabber is, of course, a ghost. He is somehow a mixture of Liberace, Elvis, and Jay Leno all at once, which is kind of amazing. He creates spells, casts wishes, but not so good at them sometimes. As a character, he provides a lot of comic relief, but he's also the source of a lot of the Beetleborgs' powers, as well as their villains. It's a bit of a give and take. The kids want to be Beetleborgs, he accidentally summoned the villains into the real world. And so having Flabber as an action figure is excellent. The figure overall is very basic. As you can see here, he's basically just a brick of a figure, but he's got some nice sculpted detail, even if things aren't fully painted in. And that's the only real downside, is that there are details missing in the paint, and he also doesn't have his cape, but this would be corrected with a later version. Overall, very, very basic figure. In fact, articulation is limited to just the shoulders, nothing else. Moving next to Mums. Mums is a 5,000-year-old mummy. He is honestly one of the funnier characters in the show, personally, and he actually has like another form under his bandages, which really would have made for a cool figure. I always love the face sculpt on Mums, the one really sagged eye, the one really bright eye, the jawline that's drooping. It just adds for that mummy flavor really, really well. And overall, the figure replicates that quite good. And I think that's what's kind of fun about these figures, is that these are characters that don't necessarily need 100 points of articulation, but maybe they could have used more than just shoulders, but the fact we got figures of them at all is something that I think is really, really cool. And yes, of course, only his shoulders do any articulating. Next up we have Frankenbeans, aka Frankie, aka, you know, gentle guy, but he's not the brightest in the bunch, but honestly, kind of a fun character, though I think he's missing the most paint. Especially in the head, you can see that they didn't paint in the rivets, he's lacking a lot of the detail, it's very, very basic stuff, and this is definitely a sacrifice for these being bundled in with a playset. And you can just see that the way his shoes are just the same exact color as the rest of his pants, he definitely feels like he has the least amount of paint out of all of them, which is kind of a bummer, because he has actually the most color range in the show. And I think that's the only real complaint I can have with these figures. They're basic, they go with the Beetleborgs collection, but they don't have a lot of paint detail. Once again, that's not the only way these are released, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Articulation, once again, is limited to just those shoulders. Next up, we have Wolfgang Smith, aka Wolfie. He is a werewolf. I always liked the way that he looked in the show. He's got a cool werewolf design to him. Not so much just copying a previous version of a werewolf, but going for a general look. The head here is really lacking in detail and depth. He looks kind of strange, really does. But overall, I think the sculpt is good with all the fur cuts that were done into the sculpting on the figure. I think the biggest disappointment paint-wise is the feet. He always had this cool thing of like his wolf feet were pushing through his shoes, and I thought that was such a great concept and like design look. And here it's just all one gray color. That's just the unfortunate part of the playset pack-in. I also do find it funny that with Wolfie versus any of the others, the Bandai like copyright stamp is like right on his butt. Everybody else is a little higher, a little lower. His is right there. That's exactly where they stamped him. Who'd have guessed it? Only his shoulders move. And lastly, of the main crew is Count Fangula, obviously our Dracula slash, vampire stand-in. He's really cool looking. I like that, with these figures, they don't have a lot of posability, but he's got kind of an expressive pose with the hands up like that. It sort of reminds me of like when in the first episode he went to go bite the kids as he first met them and they slammed the door in his face. It got kind of that vibe with his head tilted back and his hands up as they are. Just like Flabber, Fangula lacks his cape, but unlike Flabber, there isn't a version with the cape. You're just gonna have to go with the short coat version of Fangula. Of course, the arms rotate 360 and nothing else articulates. This does mean though, if you have any other pose besides the hands up, he looks a little bit awkward, like with the hands down. I don't know if that's a complaint or if it's just the way it is, but in a lot of ways, these are basically static figures. That being said, having all 5 Hillhurst monsters together like this is a nice little display. These characters do take up a lot of screen time in the show. They are major characters just on the same level as the main Beetleborgs kids. So I think that having them as figures is an excellent choice. And I think it coming later in the run, not being planned from the beginning of the toy line, says to me that these characters were popular enough to see the demand and make figures of them. I think my last negative about them is they do seem a little bit short. While the Beetleborgs in their Beetleborg forms didn't interact with the monsters as much, they were usually all around the same height, whereas here the monsters are definitely smaller than the Beetleborgs figures. That may be because the main 3 Beetleborgs are Bandai Japan molds, and the monsters are Bandai America molds, but they don't match up to the Beetleborgs in the series scale-wise, so it's just kind of a take it or leave it situation. Now, of course, we're not done there, because when the Beetleborgs had their powers go metallics, they introduced a new monster. The only way to get the new monster Little Ghoul was in the Beetleborgs Metallics, Flabber and the Hillhurst House Monsters box set. This was a re-release of the 5 monsters we got with the playset, except all of them feature updated paint detail. They definitely look like actual, standalone figures because they had to be sold as such. Flabber's got his gloves painted in, Wolfie's got his shoes painted in, Flabber has his cape, Mums has a cool paint wash, Fangula's bow tie is the correct color. They really updated these and kind of gave them a second pass and put some of the budget into them that was missing because they were previously playset pack-ins. But if you already had the monsters and you wanted Little Ghoul, this is the only way to get them was by buying them again. For me personally, I ended up buying a Little Ghoul on her own on eBay for like $10. It was not too bad. And she looks really, really nice. I think they added a lot of great details to her, so she's sort of on a higher caliber than the other monsters I have because of the extra paint budget that went into the box set.
Looking at her face, you can see the two eyes. They kind of put the black face in there. You don't want to know what's under her hood. It's some scary horrors. They showed somebody and we only saw the reactions and it was pretty terrifying. And you can see down to the proportions of the character. She's got that shorter proportion. She's got the green hands. It definitely looks like a little ghoul from Beetleborgs Metallics. Even from the back, they painted details on the back, gave it a nice paint wash. She's actually really, really detailed. And it's kind of amazing to see this sort of detail on a character that normally the toy company wouldn't make. But Bandai was riding high in the mid-90s. Though the articulation is the exact same with just the shoulders. But this does mean Little Ghoul can raise her arms up in frustration, as she did many times in the series. So really, there's nothing I could have added to this figure because, hey, she can do the iconic pose. And in fact, that's what's kind of fun about having Little Ghoul. She was a dynamic shift for the Hillhurst house, a little agent of chaos that came in and sort of changed the whole dynamics of the monsters. And I really, really like having a figure of her alongside the others. So the Metallics Beetleborgs do look nice with the monsters, even if they are taller, and that's just the nature of it. Nobody in the mid to late 90s, toy company-wise, was really, really concerned with scale. It was just all over the place. It was, hey, it's action figures. Hey, this guy should be a little bit bigger. This guy is a little bit shorter. It wasn't too into these monsters should be as tall as these people because they're the same height in the show, and no one was really concerned about that, so I can't really fault the figures for that. It's more so the industry. But in terms of actual figures, it's nice having all 6 of the main monsters from Beetleborgs, and I really like having them in my collection.
So the Hillhurst monsters are not only unique for Beetleborgs versus B-Fighter, but they're also unique in the tokusatsu landscape. There literally isn't any tokusatsu series that I know of, especially an adapted one, that really decides to be monster sitcom and also sometimes superhero. There's some other shows that we have good examples of, but that's kind of a video for another day. In terms of Beetleborgs, the Hillhurst monsters brought a unique flair to it, and it's what made Beetleborgs not just Power Rangers but kids, but something in its own right, and I think it's something that's just really amazing. If you're looking for the Beetleborgs show, it's hard to find now with streaming rights having expired, with the DVDs out of print, but hopefully it makes a resurgence in some point, because I think everybody should watch this show, because it's just really fun. Or you may hate it because you don't like the comedy, and that's totally valid as well. But that does it for this episode of the Wildcard Weekends. What will come up next? You'll have to stay tuned to find out tomorrow.